What are you thinking about right now? Seriously, as you're watching me, what are you thinking about? I know you're not thinking about what I'm saying quite yet because I've not said anything, certainly nothing interesting. You stopped here because you know me, or you go to church with me, or you go to CalTab, or at least familiar with it, or maybe Andrew just slid in a super clickbaity title to grab your attention. But back to my earlier question. What are you thinking about right now? Maybe you're thinking about something that took place earlier today at work or an argument with your spouse. Maybe you're thinking that you're hungry and you want to know what's for dinner. Or maybe you've spent a little bit too much time on YouTube these past couple of months and you're thinking about 5G networks, whether or not the moon landing was staged, and how you're surprised that one guy had some pretty convincing arguments that the earth might just be flat. Now, some of those things are worth thinking about and others not so much. This brings to mind a passage of scripture in Philippians 4 and 8, and I'll paraphrase that Paul says, brothers, whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, and lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue and if there's any praise, think on these things. Now, full transparency that those can be hard things to think about when there are so many terrible things to focus on. And when we have a 24-hour news cycle that doesn't care how anxious you and I already are. Also, that passage of scripture isn't an excuse to never think on the difficult questions of life and the circumstances that accompany them. There are certainly unpleasant things that must be thought about, and many of those unpleasant things have to be confronted. But Scripture gives us an insight for how we are supposed to behave in the face of these things. This particular passage of Scripture is a great starting point. Have you devoted any of your mental capacity to thinking on things that are true and honest and lovely? Because that can be difficult. I think that's why Paul instructs us to bring our thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. He's talking about spiritual warfare and the battleground of the mind and using imagery of war, of pulling down strongholds and casting down our imaginations and taking captives. Paul knew that the mind was a place where the enemy of our souls would seek to do battle with us. And Paul is a guy that no doubt had his share of anxiety and mental battles in his faith walk. I mean, this is a guy that went from hunting Christians to being hunted. And he had been beaten, whipped, shipwrecked in prison. He had a rough go at this whole being a Christian thing. I think he knew a thing or two about not entertaining those anxieties and instead focusing on the things that mattered. And I think one of the reasons why he could take those thoughts captive and attempt to have a Christ-like mindset is because of what he cultivated in his mental and his spiritual life. I don't think it's any accident that later when he talks about the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians, that self-control is one of those fruits. And I also don't think it's an accident that it's the very last one mentioned, because it might be just one of the hardest to practice. If you can't remember, the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and self-control. In addition to self-control, there's another fruit mentioned there that we could all probably benefit from. I mean, take your pick. They're all fantastic. But I would say patience might just be right up there for this current season. Patience with ourselves, patience with our spouse or our kids, patience with our pastor, and patience with our governmental leaders. Patience while practicing Paul's recommendation of thinking on things that are true and honest, just and pure and lovely. And that might be one of the most difficult things of all, as these things drag on and we don't have answers and we wish we knew more about what was going on. But practice patience and self-control and centering your thoughts on the things that are good and honest and lovely. Patience with my spiritual leadership when I wish they would make a decision in a certain way, but trusting that God gave them the wisdom to make the right decision for our church. Patience with our government leaders and our president and our congressmen and women as they try to make some good decisions in this, and patience and prayer for them that they're going to do the right thing. And practicing those good and lovely thoughts during this time. And there's some things they're hard to think good and lovely thoughts about. But instead of thinking about how things are so bad between me and my neighbor, instead thinking about what I can do to restore my relationship with my neighbor. Instead of thinking about how I wish decisions were made differently, thinking about how I can pray for the people that are making those decisions. Practicing patience in the meantime and controlling myself as I pray those good things. There's a definite need for patience and self-control and taking those thoughts captive. Let me leave you with a final encouragement during these times and apply it where you see fit. Apply it to your view of government or your feelings towards the church or maybe your relationship with your kids and your significant other. In the book of Nehemiah, in the Old Testament, it tells the story of the rebuilding of the walls of the city. And after the walls are rebuilt, there's an instruction that's given where he tells them, don't open the gates until the sun is hot. This is an instruction given because there had been trouble with those that didn't want to see the city rebuilt. And it was bad enough that the people that worked on it had to work with a weapon in one hand and a tool in the other. And then, though, as things seemed to normalize, there was still need for caution. And so Nehemiah said, don't open the gates till the sun is hot. Let it burn away the fog and expose where our enemies may wait for us. And I'm sure for these people trapped in the city that the practice of patience and self-control, it wasn't fun, but I'm certain it was necessary. Sometimes we have to wait. And then at the proper moment, we have to act. Proverbs says it this way, that a person that answers a matter before he hears it, it's a folly and a shame. Now, he didn't say don't answer the matter. He said wait for the facts. Practice patience and self-control and set your mind on God-pleasing things in the meantime. Or perhaps you'd like to apply Paul's word to it when he says, don't judge a thing before the appointed time. Sometimes you just got to wait and see. See what God has in store. See what God is doing in the meantime. See what God is doing on the left hand and in the shadows, because he's working all things out for our good. There's a time for waiting and certainly a time for action. And many of us, no doubt, prefer action to patience. But remember, friend, don't grow weary in well-doing, for in due season you will reap if you faint not. Hold on, my friend, just a little bit longer through this season, through the uncertainty. And in the meantime, occupy your mind with those good thoughts. God bless you. We love you. We're praying for you. And we look forward to being together again soon.